Hello and welcome to Rasa Chats. I'm here today with Alise Otilia Ramirez, who is a senior analytics engineer at Netflix. And Alise, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself? And I know you had what some people would call a non-traditional path to get into engineering. Would you like to tell us about it? I'll have some coffee.
Absolutely. Non-traditional is definitely the main word that I have heard over and over again throughout my journey, which I think is definitely fair. I actually went and got an undergraduate degree in biomedical science with all the intentions of becoming a physician. But then eventually I kind of started to think about other applications of the knowledge that I had within this space of life sciences. And although I loved medicine, I still really enjoyed programming and technology, and just the fusion of those two things were exactly what kind of threw me into this world of even considering programming as being a core asset in my job. And so that kind of just followed in line with that, ended up getting into roles of consulting that allowed me to gain skills in like databases and SQL and things along those lines. And eventually that grew into a passion of business analytics as well. So the more exposure I got, it started to formulate into something that very much kind of rudimentary looked like data science, although I didn't know the terminology for it at the time. And so ended up having to transition out of life science, unfortunately, to get into some of these roles that were a bit more available where I was residing at the time geographically in South Florida. And so that ended up kind of ensuing the rest of my journey within data science, which I think the inception was really becoming an analyst at Spirit Airlines, which allowed me the opportunity to really gain practical hands-on experience in real world data, which was messy, but fun. And so that eventually allowed me the opportunity to get hands-on experience within machine learning and, on and upwards through there before I ended up conducting or participating in a data science fellowship at Insight Data Science. And that was the precursor to my now position at Netflix.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't know, I found that maybe it's just because data science is such a young field, but so many people who are now doing machine learning have come from doing something else. I guess it makes sense because like when I was leaving grad school in 2017, data science was a thing, people knew about it. But when I was starting grad school in 2012, it didn't exist yet, right? So, and I think that there's a lot of interest in the field right now, obviously, both in more of the machine learning and the model building side, and also the sort of analytics side. And I know you've worked in both. And you're currently working in analytics. And I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about some of the differences between, engineering for something that's, more probabilistic, that's more machine learning based, that's, more on the analytics side, as opposed to sort of like your traditional application-based software engineering.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely a big delineation that exists within data science for sure. It's kind of maybe the more product data science, which is definitely more experimentation, and your deliverables maybe look like a report or some kind of metric or some kind of insight that is intangible largely, but can still benefit, the company tremendously. Whereas within the more engineering space, it's a little bit more detached from the business, but there's definitely that opportunity to still maximize and optimize our kind of like keywords and efficiencies. And the deliverables there are a lot more tangible. They're actual models, they're actual, production level systems that are coming into play. And I think the personas that exist within both of those realms are pretty different. There are definitely a lot of shared commonalities in terms of the mindset and the knowledge and the tools. But I think it's more so the level of form of understanding of those tools and those concepts that definitely differentiates the two pretty well.
Yeah, definitely. So just kind of my pick your brain about an analytics question. So Rasa, of course, if you are listening to the podcast and you didn't know, we're an open source framework for building conversational assistants, chatbots, things like that. And one of the things that I think a lot of people who are first getting into this space really struggle with is, how do you evaluate whether a chatbot is working, right? And you could do that sort of like on the product level, but you could also do it at the level of sort of the machine learning models that you're training within the assistant. So we have one model that sort of identifies where in a text string important pieces of information that you need to remember are. And we have another model that figures out, okay, so in this turn, somebody said something to the assistant. What is it that they're trying to do? And you use those pieces of information together to try and figure out what to say next. So someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of a data science background, how would you recommend they think about evaluation of a system that has a modeling component?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I would say that that's definitely something that is another kind of mindset that if anyone who is looking to transition from like a software engineering kind of role to a more machine learning engineer or data science role would definitely have to learn more about these kind of decisions. And so definitely there have been cases where within machine learning, in terms of evaluating, and I think a lot of services like Kaggle and things like that, they have these competitions that emphasize very heavily based off of exactly the metric that you're using to evaluate the model and wanting to optimize that to a certain level. But of course, getting, let's say, like 100% accuracy in some cases for a classification, to the untrained eye, that might seem ideal.
Yeah, 100%
That
is good.
wow, like you really did something there. But I think every data scientist or statistician would look at that very skeptically, for sure, and for good reason. And so I think that is definitely one thing that has to transition when you are focusing on evaluation. And more so than that, there are so many different metrics of evaluation within machine learning. So even accuracy is something very simplistic, but there are so many deeper levels of understanding, like the levels of like type 1 and type 2 errors and things like that. And that usually coincides with one, the cost of each of these errors. What happens if either one of these errors happen in terms of prioritizing one over the other? But I think there are a lot of synergies for sure within software engineering, because there are also concepts of attributes in terms of reliability, availability, and all of these other key factors. And of course, the more metrics you have, there are definitely going to be trade-offs between the two as well. So I think software engineers definitely have that understanding of it's probably impossible or very difficult to optimize for everything. There's always going to be trade-offs. And that might actually, start to help with scoping down exactly what you are trying to prioritize and what decisions you are going to make in order to decipher which one would be best. But I think there are definitely a lot of synergies, but just understanding data, I think, is one main factor that really comes down to data science and machine learning, is understanding the data that you have, the data that you will have. And I think that will definitely cement your evaluations and even your expectations of evaluating some of these models.
Definitely. I would say in the conversational space, like our data is conversations, right? It's things that people say, it's things that assistants say back to them, and that sort of back and forth. And something that we talk about a lot and we think about a lot at Rasa is that language use varies tremendously by context. And the context of talking with your assistant and doing a specific task is very narrow. So the more that your data can be the exact data of the person doing the thing that you're trying to do, the better your results are going to be. So having that sort of awareness of, how language works, I don't know, that's like a weird thing. That's like a very broad topic, like how does language work? But like how do people use language in the context that you're trying to ask them to do it, I think is a good place to start.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that domain expertise is something that I think is absolutely essential. And I think that's why data science definitely has so many experts who have PhDs in different subjects that seem wildly disconnected to data science. But when you think about its application and what the model is actually trying to do, maybe having that expert knowledge within geology or whatever the subject may be is highly necessary in order to have a good understanding of the data and also the metrics that would best be utilized for the evaluation.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's an excellent point. Um, so speaking of data and data literacy and knowing about data, I know that you've done some writing about um, biases in data and data literacy. So when you talk about sort of knowing data and having domain expertise, this isn't necessarily just for data scientists, right? This is for stakeholders. This is for everyone who's using a product that has a machine learning component in it, which I mean today is. I mean, if you're using the internet, you're using a product that has a machine learning component. If you're using Netflix, you're using a product that has a machine learning component. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit to what sort of things are important there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you mentioned a great point, and that was definitely the center of my writing that article in the first place, was really to stop just speaking to an audience of people who are aware of their position as statisticians, as data scientists, as data analysts, because obviously every day we're working with data, we're very well versed in that, but we make up a very small percentage at the end of the day of individuals, but we're actually not the only ones affected or, utilizing data or being experimented upon, with different algorithms and things like that. So really all of us who are on platforms are also, just as invested essentially. And so I think it's important for everyone to have a global view, at least at some level, of what data is, how it's being captured, how companies are utilizing it, and how that could potentially affect you sometimes in a harmful way, which is definitely possible in some applications. But also in just, generic ways, I think that was kind of the easiest way to kind of prove a certain point of, sometimes we get certain advertisements for something that we looked up, and I think that's a very real use case that everybody can kind of evaluate and understand that their data is being utilized for this specific purpose. And so I think data literacy is definitely something that is absolutely essential for everyone to have. And I think that will enable us to have stricter regulations to make sure that in some of these use cases that we actually aren't harming individuals, because there is a lot of opportunity for that to happen, especially since a lot of companies have algorithms and they aren't widely distributed. If you are a data person, you might be aware of like out of the box, like random forest and some of these algorithms. But even that, there are some customized algorithms that companies develop and own that aren't shared outwardly. And so we don't really know how they're utilizing the data, maybe what data they are actually capturing and utilizing. And so down the line, that can definitely be something in terms of interpretability of those results that can be very harmful, since we as consumers are not able to see the exact steps for how an algorithm determined the exact outcome that we were delivered. And so there definitely can be biases in the outcome. And that's why I think going back to the root of the problem would be understanding data at a more global level, essentially.
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about how chatbot developers in particular, and people who are working in NLP can make it clear the ways in which data is being used. And there's a lot of reflection of your social identity in the language that you use. And I think this is something that, like, I think we all know sort of like intuitively, like you can kind of tell like, oh, she's American, she's got an American accent, for example. Or even from my voice, you could probably like make some guesses about my gender, perhaps my social class, definitely my age. And all of these factors are being, expressed in your language use, both in speech and in text. And how do we as, developers, NLP developers, I realize you don't work in NLP, but I'm talking here to the we who is the audience here, help to protect our users, help to protect privacy, help to build products that really work and don't cause harm. Yeah, and I think a clear thing that you can do is make it clear to people when they're just speaking about text, not speaking about things like tracking pixels or data that's been linked to in other ways, but just text that you produce. Let's say when you're talking with a chatbot, whether that's being stored, what it's being used for, making privacy policies not only easily available, but also easy to understand. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard because it's very much like a product question, right? But at the same time, those decisions, like what features are you going to use? What other tertiary features do those correlate to? And how is that going to affect the outcome and the people who are using your product is very much a question that machine learning engineers should ask. And I think that the folks in analytics in particular are really well positioned to help answer.
Absolutely. And I think just down the line, companies should definitely think about when they are creating a service or a new feature, what impact are they having on the community as a whole? I think there are several examples that we can think about. If certain websites and products didn't exist, how would society be different? Like what exactly are they bringing and is it positive or not? And I think that's a question that isn't asked too often. It's usually like, is this serving our purpose? Yes or no? And can we optimize that specifically for our benefit? But I think, unfortunately, the question isn't asked of what kind of impact are we having on our audience and people alike?
Yeah, and do they know about it? And I think a lot of times the answer to that is kind of no, right? Or that they may have been told about it, but in like very, legalese, very behind three document links that maybe it's not, even if you are a machine learning person, entirely clear what it is that they're keeping and what they're using and what they can infer from that and what they don't know necessarily that they've inferred from that, but their models have picked up on that latent variable. So, yeah. Speaking of clear communication, I know another thing that you've talked about publicly is technical writing. So my job title is a senior developer advocate, and part of my job, not the main part of my job, but a big part of my job is sort of clearly communicating technical concepts. Primarily not in writing these days, primarily in video format. And I think to tie this back into the previous conversation, how to explain to users what's going on in a responsible way is a really clear application of technical writing. So I wonder if you have any tips for people who are interested in doing a little bit more technical writing. How you get started? How do you make it doable? Sorry, I know my chair is extremely creaky.
Yeah, well, I definitely love writing. It's funny because actually one of the kind of many career paths that were laid out to me was being a novelist and writing books and things like that. Unfortunately, that never really obviously materialized. But I still really love the act of writing. And I think for many reasons that you just listed, being able to communicate with individuals and kind of spark something. So I think it comes from an aspect of wanting to teach people and having them actually understand, but then also that emotional aspect of them just really being able to understand a little bit more about yourself as well. And I think technology in general kind of seems like a very like stoic, unemotional kind of topic, but I think it's actually the opposite. I think technology is a very emotional kind of space. It's a part of every single thing that we basically do in society these days, and it touches pretty much every aspect of from the time we wake up and maybe all throughout the day. So I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity there for anyone who does want to get into the space of writing. And I would say some advice that I have is generally to, of course, only write about topics that you are very passionate about. I don't necessarily think that you have to be an expert to start writing. And I think that's something that holds people back a lot, but you're really bringing your perspective and your opinion on something, and that's valid. So you don't have to necessarily be an expert in any regard. And I also really suggest kind of just word vomiting for the lack of better words. But I think a lot of people, when they start writing or creating anything, they're automatically judging themselves as they are writing, kind of critiquing. But I think the best way to have a voice in whatever you're writing is to just dump everything that you're thinking on a page and then look back and kind of filter, organize, rearrange. Absolutely. And then, of course, getting feedback from a lot of different individuals on how they perceive your writing But I think it's definitely something that I would love to see more people in technology doing, just because you get so many different perspectives and you're able to see so many different viewpoints on even the same topic can be so helpful. And even though there might be tutorials on the exact same thing, sometimes you just find that one specific one that just works for you. So definitely don't be defeated by the fact that there are a lot of other maybe duplicates on the same topic.
Yeah, I think if you haven't done a lot of writing, it may not be obvious to you, but pretty much nothing that you read anywhere that's not like really informal text that's meant for quick communication is actually a first draft. Like everything's been edited, everything's been changed. And I've definitely found that in my work, when I sit down to like write a tutorial, for example, sort of broadly outline the steps and then going through and like double checking everything and looking stuff up, right? If you're like, maybe you want to draw an analogy to the invention of the bicycle and sort of like the societal impact that had. Well, I mean, you don't want to just sort of like assume that you know what was going on. And I don't know, what would that have been? Edwardian England? I feel like the bicycle is English. I could be wrong on that. It feels like that sort of like, I'm pretty sure it was the Edwardian era. I don't know where it was. See, I would look this up if I were including this like as a snippet in a technical writing thing. And I think that's sort of like process of going and looking things up and learning and sort of building a knowledge base in a way that you can communicate effectively and clearly really helps you cement your understanding of a topic. So it can be really helpful for your learning as well as communicating whatever it is you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, especially if you're in the field of like analytics or data science. You know for sure one of the core functionality of your job is to make sure that you are able to condense things when necessary, but then also share enough insight and information as possible as well, which can definitely kind of take some time and some teetering back and forth between analogies and metaphors that you're leveraging and terminology as well. But I think definitely understanding your target audience is definitely something that is like so essential for anything that you end up writing.
Yeah, and I think that sort of like way of classifying and sharing information is not just it's not just in the medium of writing, right? So like this is going to be a little bit rude, but like the way I can tell that somebody's super new to analytics is that they'll like send me a report that has 1,000 graphs in it. Like I understand that like that feels very thorough and useful, but if I'm trying to like quickly parse something, it's much more useful for me to have the most impactful 3 graphs and you have an annotation that's like, this is where the outage is. Look at what happened. Here's where it fixed. Look at what happened. And you've really condensed that information and giving me a scaffolding to understand it. And I think that's also true for anything, even, designing a conversation for a chatbot. Like you don't necessarily need to go through and, think about every single possible thing somebody might want to do. What are the most important couple things? How can you get those up and off the ground and working really well right away? And then expanding if you need to.
Absolutely. I think something, I feel like I've gotten kind of questions around things like that from individuals looking to transition into the field. And for me, I can definitely kind of get a little carried away in some of my analytics, I would say. But I think what is helpful for me to concentrate on the main objective that I'm focusing on. And maybe, like you mentioned, the key 3 or 4 questions that I'm trying to answer. And so are those visualizations clearly able to reflect the answer within that without having to write a massive paragraph underneath it to basically describe the visualization. The whole point of the visualization or metric is to easily divulge this information without wordiness necessarily. And so I think constantly thinking back to that is definitely something that helps me to keep my.
Yeah, definitely. It's I would say it's a constant struggle to take things out. So I know that you've been involved with a couple of organizations. PyLadies is an organization for sure that I've done a little bit with. But you also worked with BlackTIDES or founded BlackTIDES. Why don't you tell us about BlackTIDES?
Yeah. So I'm definitely one of the individuals on the team. So it was actually founded by Matthew Finney and Kimberly Diaz. And so those two basically had separate initiatives that ultimately came together under a unified umbrella of wanting to help Black professionals within basically technology, informatics, data science, engineering, epidemiology, and social science. So a lot of a lot of different fields there, but the essential theme is data. We're all really handling and working with data at the end of the day. But of course, those can go into all different types of roles even within that. So data science, data engineering roles, but then analytic roles, engineering roles, technology roles, IT roles, things along those lines. And so essentially what we all notice is that there is definitely a gap in terms of being able to transition easily into roles when you are a Black individual. A lot of the times there is a very large disparity in the number of individuals in these kinds of fields. And that was one question that we asked and wanted to kind of break apart and also be able to pretty much assist in that transition. You also hear very often like there's a pipeline problem. But myself, I know I am connected with many well-versed, intelligent Black individuals who would be highly capable in any of these roles. But it's more so some kind of gray area that kind of makes it a little bit difficult for them to find placements in some of these roles. And so that's essentially what we're looking to do, is to inform our community, to provide opportunities, and to be able to provide mentorship opportunities as well for those who are newly transitioning into any of these roles.
Yeah, it's I mean, obviously I have not familiar with the experience of being Black and transitioning into one of these roles, but something that definitely made my transition easier was having a social network in place, which is, overwhelmingly white because of a number of factors. But like knowing, data engineers and being able to ask them like, oh, hey, are there any roles coming up? And I think helping to develop that same sort of network to, connect capable people with roles where they really excel is a very urgent need. So if folks were interested in getting involved in some capacity or supporting, how would they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually are having a general meeting, which is just an opportunity for anyone who wants to join BlackTIDES or learn more about our upcoming events. That's going to be January 17th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And so if you follow us on our LinkedIn page, it's BlackTIDES Data, and you'll be able to join and kind of follow along with events that we're having. But we do plan to have monthly general meetings for everyone who is interested. And we actually are still in the process of developing our more executive committee. So if you are interested in being a big part of BlackTIDES as we try to become a nonprofit organization, and you have any kind of expertise within like marketing or anything along those lines that you would love to be able to utilize and help with our mission, then definitely feel free to join those meetings. We also have our Twitter handle, which is BlackTIDES1, and you can definitely learn more information on becoming a member or just affiliating yourself with us and hopefully being able to create some beneficial partnerships down the line.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a real need in the field to, for just people to be in jobs, because it's I'd say there's a pretty big demand for people with expertise, or as you mentioned, even related expertise in a field that's, data heavy, who want to move into more of a technical role. And this will, for our listeners, this comes out on Wednesday the 13th. So if you are listening to it before that Sunday, the 17th, check it out. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to know if you had any things you wanted to plug, any things you wanted to talk about we didn't discuss. Just anything you wanted to bring up to share with the Rasa community.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. First of all, it's been a great experience. A lot of great questions. But I would say definitely follow me on Twitter. My handle is Alise, so feel free. And I'm kind of opening the floor up to mentorship because that's something that I'm extremely passionate about as well. So feel free to follow me. I often share useful information when I'm kind of in the mood for that. Other times it might be a little less relevant, but nonetheless, I try to create a space that allows individuals to connect and to learn more about transitioning, whether you're traditional or non-traditional. And hopefully we'll be able to create some great connections that way.
Yeah, definitely. And I would, I've been following you on Twitter for a while now. I don't actually remember when I followed you, but it was a great decision. And if you are a Twitter user, I'd recommend following Alise as well. All right. Thanks so much for joining me today, Alise. Listeners, stay tuned. We're going to shout out some of our Rasa contributors. And I will see the listeners next time. And Alise, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I just want to take a moment to thank all of the contributors to help make Rasa what it is. And that means anyone who made a code contribution or a support contribution and helped out somebody else. We're really so happy that you are part of our community, and we feel really grateful. And I hope that the upcoming year is a great one for you. If you're interested in contributing to Rasa, you can check it out at rasa.com/community/contribute, or we have a GitHub project board with good issues to get you started, and that's at the Rasa HQ GitHub. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.